Last but not least, Christa, you may have taken a taste. We tend to be flexible on these things, particularly when we have interesting speakers. So we will rather sacrifice the timetable to listen to interesting people. Christa Gyori is our last speaker. Christa is the founder and the co-founder and CEO of Leaders for Purpose, an organization in the US that specializes to promoting the ideals of purpose and making them known and helping companies to implement purpose-driven strategies. So we have asked her to share with us her experiences, how companies do it in the States as well as all over the world, and tell us what kind of insights we can get to be able to put into action these noble ideas of purpose. Christa.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Ah, great. Such an honor to be here. Such great discussions, and wow, what a beautiful place. I'm Christa Gyori, and today I'm going to be talking to you about 6 strategies for purpose-centered innovation. So we've talked today a lot about the why behind why you should have a purpose, and some of the how, and I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into that. But to get us started, I'm going to play a video just to give you a sense of the work that we do at Leaders on Purpose. These are some of the CEOs that we work with globally around this topic. So if you would play the video.
Nobody can be successful in a world that fails.
The issues that we're facing today, like climate change, like poverty alleviation, can only be solved if we all work together.
Given the shifts we've seen with COVID, any economic stimulus happening has to be mindful of this next generation of business thinking.
Time to form another committee, to have another conversation, to go do a working group, but at some point you have to take action.
There's this kind of myth and this thing that we used to hear, which is, you know, you have to do bad things sometimes to make money. That can't be the accepted conversation in business.
You do not add value by just being compliant. You create value by being ethical.
So whatever we do, we need to think what impact we create.
For multinationals, the commitments are really to do their part in supporting the emergence of a 4th sector, to advocating for government policy,
to enable organizations, businesses, and the full ecosystem to scale during these kind of efforts.
I love the idea of the open letter because it's a call to action, which is exactly what the world needs. If we're going to change the world, we'd better link arms with each other and go out and change it.
The choice is not whether to get on the train or not, it's when.
Seeing that nobody has been left behind, I feel that I've made my contribution.
Well, I would say to businesses, don't wait for policymakers to force you to do the right thing.
Jump on in the water's fine. In other words, take the leap.
What are you waiting for? It's really clear that the shift is underway.
Business leaders who get this will immensely enhance their company's brand value in the decade to come.
We show that business leaders can contribute to a better world also.
So the people that you're traveling with on this journey are the people that history will remember positively.
Join our efforts so that we can come out of this pandemic cleaner, greener, more resilient.
Come join the movement and be part of it.
join into the meaningful conversation about your role of your business and society.
With your energy, with your passion, I have no doubt that we will seize this as one of the biggest opportunities that the world has ever seen.
Join leaders on purpose and join a call to action in our world. Let's change the world together.
Okay, here we go. Okay. So that gives you a little sense of the work that we're doing and the people that we're working with. And we've been talking throughout this whole conference about purpose. What is it? And how do we bring it into our businesses? As you can see, the statistics, 86% of employees want to work for a purpose-driven corporation. You know, we have consumers that are demanding it of businesses. We have investors saying, you know, if you are not a purpose-driven business, we won't list you. But then we have 78% of CEOs saying it's a lot harder than we thought it would be. Before you really get started and I dive into this, I think it would be helpful really to get a definition of what is purpose, at least what am I talking about when I'm talking about purpose, because the lexicon is so huge. So purpose is the commitment to create value for the benefit of society, for business, of course, and for the planet. So if we think about, I think one of the speakers earlier today talked about the 17 sustainable development goals. Those 17 goals represent something, market-based solutions to public problems. That's what the 17 goals represent for business. And so, but how do you do it? You know, we look at the business environment today and wow, it's really changed from yesterday's role as a CEO when everything was sort of, you know, predictable, you knew what you had to do and, you know, you knew who was going to be there. Today's role looks a little bit like this, right? I mean, we've got, you know, you have to not only deal with the financial implications of the company and make sure that you're profitable, all the same things that you used to have to do, but now you're looking at digitization, pandemics, we have climate change, we have employees of multiple generations working together. I mean, and shortening tenures, right? We've talked about that today. So it's a whole different world now. I will say, and I love the conversation that we just had about, you know, how valuable is the CEO to an organization. I actually have done some research on this. There's a researcher that did looked into when a CEO dies at a company, what happens to the market. And it used to be just 10% value for the company. In 2013, the value of the CEO went up to 38% when the CEO passed away. So your role as a leader could not be more important. And I know you're feeling the pressure. But we also have the most amazing opportunity of any generation. I mean, if you look at those sustainable development goals, I mean, we won't hit those without business. And what we do as leaders today will impact not only the next few generations, but many generations to come. I've heard a statistic recently to say what we do in the next 10 years will impact the next 10,000. Now, I don't know any other generation that has had that type of importance in our world, and as business leaders, you are leading that. So let's talk about 6 strategies for how to do it, because purpose-driven businesses are in the best place to do it, and they're most well positioned for this. So I'm going to talk to you about 6 things coming out of our research. Well, the first one is dare to be audacious. Now, I know that sounds a little bit fluffy, but we're going to dive into the power of an audacious goal for your company and how that can really bring you forward in ways that you might not expect. Understand your impacts. I mean, I think we had some questions in earlier sessions about how do I do it? How do I actually understand where to go? And Alex had some really good suggestions around materiality. We'll dive a little bit deeper into that. Align your business. Now, this seems like a very fundamental thing. We know that when we're making any sort of business transition, you need to align it. But I'm going to talk to you about some things that people often miss when they're doing purpose-centered innovation and really bringing it to the heart of their company. Partnering up. Now, I know we've been doing partnerships for a really long time, but I'm going to talk to you about some innovative partnerships that are happening now that are really propelling businesses forward in this space. Rethinking leadership. So I think we had such a great discussion here earlier about what does it mean to be a leader today, and should we have empathy, and what are the factors of that? And so we'll talk about some of the findings that have come out of our study. And lastly, I'll talk about considering sequencing. This is something that has become more and more apparent, that it's really important to get the sequence right, because many times I've heard story after story of people who had the best intention, but they didn't have all the foundation in place before they launched their purpose, and that can be very detrimental. And so I'm hoping to save you a lot of time by that. But before I get started, I want to give you a little bit of background about myself. Excuse me. I spent most of my career working in multinational businesses. I started at Unilever in 2001, and in 2010, when Paul Pullman came in and took over the business, was really part of that work to bring purpose to the core of our business. And so through a series of projects that I was leading and doing at Unilever, I was awarded a fellowship at Harvard. And so it was 2015, so I'd been doing this work in Unilever for some time, and so as part of the fellowship, I had to come up with a project. And I don't know if you recall this, but in 2015, the Harvard Business Review changed what it meant to be a top CEO. Every year, since they started, the top 100 CEOs in the Harvard Business Review have only been selected based on financial metrics. In 2015, they added just a small weighting for environmental, social, and governance metrics, and the list radically shifted. So Jeff Bezos, who'd been #1 for year over year, fell to 87. Warren Buffett fell completely off the list. And we saw leaders that were doing well and doing good at the same time. And so that became my study, because having been at Unilever for all that time, and it felt like we were pioneering, making one step forward, 2 steps back. We made a mistake, and couldn't somebody have told us about this? And so here were leaders that were clearly doing that work. What they didn't have in the Harvard Business Review, and the real gap here, was the how-to. Great to see that this list is there, but how the heck did they do it? And that became our study. So I just moved to London at the time, and a good friend of mine, a colleague of Alex's, actually, Christian Bush, had been studying this for years. And so I asked him to join. I had a colleague from Harvard that joined. And during the time I was there, and this, one of my friends was working at the World Bank and became tasked with the private sector engagement strategy. She called me and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" I told her about the study, and she said, "Wow, when businesses transition, there's huge implications for multilateral organizations. Can we be part of it?" And that became our study. So we thought we would just get this one study done, figure this out, and get it out to as many people as we could. Well, as it turned out, you can't do this in 1 year. So we did our study and interviewed 15 of those top 100 CEOs on the Harvard Business Review list. We brought it to the World Bank and did we shared the findings at the IMF World Bank Spring meetings. And then we just found that we needed to continue, that we just scratched the surface. So what we do now, in 2018, we incorporated it as a business. We've continued with our study. We continue to interview and document and look for durable patterns. So what we do with the study is not just to say this is what one company is doing. We try to look for durable patterns across organizations, across industries, so that we can quickly share them with anybody who wants to be making this type of transition. We do an annual CEO Summit every year that we host in collaboration with the United Nations as part of the UN General Assembly meetings in New York, where we bring together not only these world-leading CEOs, but we bring heads of state to join. We've had some in 22 2 countries, we have new policies enacted as a result of some of the work that we've done. We bring together thought leaders. We bring together entrepreneurs who are doing remarkable work that some of these big multinationals could be customers of, all with the idea to advance purpose-driven leadership. We're also bringing together a community of leaders that are, we know you just can't be meeting once, so we do that as well. We have meetings throughout the year, and we do some select advisory work. Okay, so I'm going to dive into the study, but first I'll tell you a little bit more about it. So the study is of multinational organizations primarily, and why is that? Well, when I was at Unilever, we touch 3 billion people every day with our products. That's, when we make change, it can be massive. Also, though, these are some of the most complex organizations. So when they make change, it's really difficult, and there are things that we can get out of that can apply to any type of an organization. They work in a multitude of countries, many in 193 countries, and so they're impacted by policy, and how they deal with that has implications for any type of business. So these are the criteria. They have to be in over 30 countries. They have to be in the top percentile financially, because of course we need to be doing well and doing good. Top percentile for environmental, social, and governance metrics, and we added metrics from Glassdoor this year, so looking at what are your employees saying about you. And then we need to make sure that the CEO is talking the talk, that this just isn't his team doing it, but that he's actually doing it. In addition to multinationals, we bring in regional champions that we think are doing excellent work that need to be highlighted, that their work needs to be fed into this. So these are some of the CEOs that have participated to date in the study, so you can see. And then, so let's get into these 6 findings. So dare to be audacious, we talked about that. What do I mean by that? So the power of audacity in being purpose first. I know as business leaders, that sounds a little bit scary, right? We're used to incremental improvement, and we know that we're going to be held accountable for what we promise. And now we're seeing the SEC and different government organizations, when you commit to something, they want you to show that you're doing the work. But I will challenge that. I will tell you that without fail, every one of the people that we've spoken to has put out an audacious goal, and it scared them a little bit. And this is a different type of leadership, right? So these are some of the quotes from some of the CEOs that we've talked to that I think are really indicative of what this mindset is. So where others see risk, we see opportunity. Where others see risk, we see opportunity. Now think about that. That sounds pretty audacious, but also it tells you about the market, right? That's a market opportunity that your competitors are walking away from, so that's an opportunity. We're pioneering where others retreat. Again, wow, who doesn't want to get behind and work for a company that's pioneering where others retreat? So these are just a few of the many quotes. I want to give you an example of what does this actually look like in practice. So this is the Danish oil and natural gas company. And back in 2008, they were preparing for their board meeting, the CEO and his team, and it was very obvious that things were changing. Now, this is before the financial market collapsed. It's early in the beginning of the year. But they had been hearing about reports from the IPCC and a number of other agencies linking definitively climate change to human behavior. So up until that time, people, there was some question about it, but about in 2008, 95% of scientists agreed that climate change was linked to human behavior. And digging down a little bit more, it was not only linked to human behavior, but it was linked to fossil fuels. People were pointing the finger at fossil fuels. Now, this Danish oil and natural gas company, as is in their name, was 85% of their business was in fossil fuel and 15% in other types of innovation. So imagine this is you sitting in the meeting. I mean, every natural gas and every oil company had this same research. The UK was putting in legislation. All around the world there were things. So what would you do going into this board meeting? Well, the team went in and they proposed something radical, something audacious. They said, what if we completely swap this so that by they had an earlier date than 2040, but by 2030, 2015, we actually changed and we're completely a renewables company. Outrageous, right? What stock, what person would get behind that? But actually they came out of the meeting with that as the goal. By 2040, they couldn't get it earlier because people thought this is ridiculous, we'll never be able to make that, but if we give ourselves enough time, we can do it. Well, I don't know has anybody here heard of Ørsted? No? Okay. Ørsted has been ranked the best case, actually, for a purpose-driven transformation. What they did was they changed their name from Dong Energy to Ørsted. They completely rebuilt the business, and by 2019, they had hit their target 21 years ahead of time. I mean, nobody even thought they could make their target. Not only did they make it, but they hit it 21 years in advance. And in addition to that, they were more profitable in this new realm because imagine, did any other oil company do this? You didn't see anybody else. So others were retreating. They were moving forward. And so they had tremendous and continue to have tremendous financial success. So that's just one of many examples of an audacious goal. Understand your impact. How do you even get started in this? Well, one of the things that is fairly obvious, and Alex talked about it earlier today, about the materiality assessment. That's a really critical role in this. Understanding what are your impacts? Where do you sit? This is some systems mapping that we do. We teach a class at Harvard called Executive Leadership for Sustainability, and we have people do mapping, but beyond just the materiality assessments, it's, looking at where are your impacts, and I bet most of you here are doing some form of an ESG report or sustainability report, so you understand that layer of it. But I would venture further than that. So if we think back to in the last example for Ørsted, what they did was, in addition to understanding what their impacts were, they took a look at, okay, what's happening? What's the public sentiment? This is a little softer, but how are people feeling? What types of legislation is happening? What is science telling us? Do we fight the science and pretend like it's not existing, or do we dive in headlong? What are my employees asking? So they actually do an assessment, most companies, of what's the temperature kind of for change what's the culture in our company, and what's the feeling for change here? So a broad mapping. So that, and this is really, really important to start here, because one of the things that we've seen, we also have them map out when they've had a project, and often what will happen is when a project fails, they've missed a stakeholder. So this map really helps you to understand, we better get that stakeholder involved, because otherwise we could spend a lot of time and effort and the project will go nowhere. So it's an incredibly valuable exercise. I'll give you an example also of a company that did this and how it changed the way they went to business, went into the market. So Philips is a company that participated in our study, and they've got many different divisions, but they had identified Africa as a market that they wanted to move into for infant mortality specifically, so looking at their medical equipment line division. And what they wanted to do, they found out that, Africa has one of the highest infant mortality rates in the world. And so they felt that their ultrasound machine could be a real solution there, because they were, early detection could be a real cure for some of this. But as they got into this and they started to do the mapping, they realized that their traditional business model wasn't going to work. So what their model was, as many businesses, is they would sell the machine to the hospital. And that's it. They'd sell the machine, they'd be done, and then in a few years, they'd sell the new model, and that was the business model. Well, they found out that there's a lot of old equipment just laying in landfills there, and, the government would subsidize the machines, but they really didn't have a budget for that. So what they ended up doing was looking at their business from a more holistic perspective. So as you know, they also do lighting, they've got a number of different divisions, and they also looked at the problem from a more holistic perspective. there, what is really causing this problem? And it was really about care, overall care. So they said, what could we do? So they built these Phillips Community Life Centers. And it actually changed the way they did business, not only in this region, but they found that it was very profitable. It was much more profitable for them in the long run. It gave them the early seeds of what has become their circular economy model, because when they did this rental versus just selling the machine to their customers, they had a much closer relationship with the customers. So they understood what they needed and how they were using it. And they built and so the retention of their customers was much longer. So they learned a lot out of this. And mapping was a huge part of this work. So alignment of your business. This is the next thing. It, again, sounds incredibly obvious. Align your business. We know when you're doing any sort of reorg, you think about alignment, right? But I'm talking about to think a little bit more like a purpose alignment. So many organizations, when they transition, they'll get, a big chunk of what they're doing right. So they get the human resources, sort of the incentive structures right. Philips, for example, when they changed their business model, they were incenting their salespeople on sales of the machine. So now to incent them on a much smaller number, right? They had to incent them in a different way. So thinking through some of that, but I'm going to say even go further than this. As you know, and we've talked about it today really nicely, purpose. A lot of people are skeptical, and they should be, because there's a lot of purpose washing out there. And so if you go out with a purpose statement and you go out and you start to transition your business, but you are still lobbying for something that is very different than what you're saying out front, people will find out about it. You're not paying taxes. Where is the pension fund being invested? People are digging into that, and the alignment of that helps to ensure it builds trust, it builds credibility, and it's something to be thinking through for your organization. So this is just something to be aware of, and something that we see people struggle with sometimes. Partner up. So we've talked about partnering a little bit. There's that saying that if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go far, go together. But I would say COVID really showed us that if you want to go fast and far, go together. And technology is really enabling a lot of that. And partnerships in the way that we look at, addressing market-based solutions to public problems, right? So we're addressing big problems that governments are struggling with. We can't afford, as a company, if you want to deal with a water table problem, you're at a bit of a disadvantage, right? If you put all of your money in and your competitor doesn't. So we're seeing partnering up of pro-competitive type partnerships. It de-risks the investment on your behalf. It also subsidizes innovation. There's incredible innovation that happens there. So here's some examples of pro-competitive partnerships. And these are, this first one, microinsurance. I know AIG is here. This is one that was led by AIG. Brian participated in our study and brought this to our attention, but they are at risk, they're really exposed by insuring these smallholder farmers and people in some of these regions. So they put together this pro-competitive partnership to address microinsurance. And it's been incredibly successful and really, really helpful, because we know that if we don't address that, these smallholder farmers in these regions, the food supply is disrupted for many of us, and we're all actually very impacted. So that's really a good one. And these are competitors working together, really, really interesting. Now here, the one in the middle is financial inclusion, so banking the unbanked. Here's where we're seeing some really exciting things happen, all businesses here, but we've got banks working with telecommunications, and imagine, when you get this right, the innovation is spectacular, and you are actually moving things along in ways you could never do by yourself. The next one is around food security. So here's where we've got both business working with USAID and some nonprofits as well. These are a different type of public-private partnership and very, very efficient. So they're verifying their output, but they're creating the outcome that they're looking for, financial inclusion, for example. So these are some examples of partnerships. Now, we've talked a lot about leadership, and that's such an important component to all of this. How do you have to, what are the new leadership skills that you need to have? And empathy, I think, is such a good one. But these are some of the leadership skills that we've seen in the leaders that we speak with, and we don't have time to dive into each of these today, but really engaging with their employees, taking the time to, what we think of is that you're leading from the middle now, which is a completely different way to lead. We're used to, in the hierarchical organization, we lead from the top, but because we're dealing with so many different issues, and you cannot possibly be an expert in everything, leading from the middle is a great way. It also, it inspires so much, it really gets your employees involved. Empathy is one, being curious, continuous learning, right? Gosh, blockchain, how do we deal with that now in our business? I mean, you have to be continually learning and investing in education for your employees. Then when we think about balancing the short term and the long term, so we talked about trade-offs, how does a leader today manage those trade-offs, and how do you deal with sometimes a situation where there are no good answers, and letting purpose being at the center of that. And then communicating authentically. And I loved, in this last discussion, one of our leaders was talking about how, sometimes I make a mistake. Sometimes I say, and I just own up to it and continue on. So here's an example from one of the CEOs that participated in our study. This is Ajay Banga. and he's talking about how leadership is a privilege. And particularly today, it's a privilege, and you're not born with it, but you earn it. And so what his leadership, he's been a CEO for a long time, and he used to be more of a traditional kind of command and control style CEO, but coming into this new position, he tried something a little bit different, which led to an audacious goal. What he started to do was say, okay, how can we address some of these big challenges? How can we be part of this? And they netted out on, how do maybe we can bank the unbankable, right? There's so many people out there that aren't included in our financial system, and it's very expensive to be not included in our financial system. I mean, if you are only using cash, you're paying high interest rates, you're risking, a lot. So he said, well, what if we address that? So he walked around, talked to his employees. Some of these ideas came from his employees. Then he went out into the field, and he said that was where it really hit him. He started to talk to people that would be impacted by them taking this stance. He talked to government then brought him in, and he talks about this woman, Hilka, that he spoke with. And Hilka changed his life. Hilka was somebody that had been one of those unbankable people. She was an older woman and had never been in the system. And she got one of their early cards. And that card gave her an identity. And that identity gave her she was being counted. She could vote. She was important. And she said it absolutely changed her life. And she was crying when he was there, and he said he was crying. It was such an emotional thing. So he left that, and he came up with this goal. We're going to help 500 million people get into the system, and 40 million of these small merchants. And he said, I thought I was crazy. My board thought I was crazy. We're never going to hit that. Well, 2 years into it, they hit that number, and you'll see they came out with doubled it. They said, let's get 1 billion people. That is leadership, audacity. That's some of the things we talked about. Sequencing. Okay, I'm going to wrap us up a little bit with sequencing here. This is something I would never have thought to talk to you about, but time and time again, coming to meetings like these, I hear when people struggle and things fail, often it has to do with the sequencing of things. Sometimes they'll go out early, you get so excited, you just go out into the market and you want to share it with everybody, but you haven't built the foundation yet to be able to help to accommodate that. We did that at Unilever. I felt that myself, so I understand the impetus. So here's an example of how one of the people we work with actually did this. And this is, I think, a really indicative of how some of the best businesses, bring it all together. So this is a multinational company. They operate in 60 countries, over 100,000 people. Half of their brands are local and half are global brands. They've been in business for 100 years, so you know they've been doing things the same for a very long time. And they've got about 25 billion in turnover. This is a company that's traded on the stock exchange. So I'm going to be really fast because I know you can't read this, but I'm going to walk you through it briefly. So you'll look up here. In June of 2017, the CEO has this idea. We need to be more purpose-driven. What do I do? Then in July, he reaches out. He gets his chief strategy officer involved and talks to them. They decide, okay, let's put together, let's get a team working on this. Let's think about how we're going to do it. Then September, so after they've done some research, they decide we're going to bring in a chief purpose officer, and that person is not going to be accountable to anybody specifically, just to the board and to our group, but they'll have some autonomy within the organization. They go to the board, and what I love about this is look at how they're slowly bringing in partners. They're not going out all at once. They bring in the board. They take it to the board. The board says, I don't think you have this all figured out. Sends them back. November, they do a mapping exercise, the one I talked to you about earlier, right? So they look at it and they get some new ideas. They go back to the board. We have an idea. Here's what we need to do. This is what's come out of our mapping exercise. Our employees are saying they really want this. They want to be part of it. We need education. Then in December, not until December did they set the audacious goal. What we're going to do is we're going to double our growth, right? We're going to double the size of our company and cut our environmental footprint in half. Very similar to Unilever. This is not Unilever. We're going to be net zero. They didn't call it net zero at the time, but essentially we're going to be net zero, and we're going to empower every one of our employees to feel like they're an owner in the business. That's very audacious for a company this size. So they bring it back to the board. The board likes it. They're really impressed with the framework that they put together and the market approach. Then they in February, so quite a long time later, they're getting everything in place. They go and they bring it to their top 20 GMs, and they socialize the idea with the GMs. What do you think about this? This is what we're doing. Here's a toolkit for how to do it. About 80% like the idea, 20% think it's ridiculous. But they power on. So by March, they've got some really good early results. They bring that to the board, and the board gives them the thumbs up. See how they're iterating. So then we go on and on. I won't go through all of this, but you can see they have 3 divisions. They bring the divisions in. They're constantly going back to the board, doing more research. How is this working for us? By July, they come up with this idea, this alignment of their business that we talked about earlier. So these are the ways we're going to go forward. We're going to engage our workforce. We're going to empower them. So connecting their workforce. They're going to connect our people to our business and our vision and be innovative. And this is how we're going to do it. We're going to be the most competitive business. And these are the things that we're going to do. So this isn't the end of it. It continues on. So they've got the 3 divisions. They get some feedback. Things didn't go as well as they thought they would. They go back to the drawing board. Bring them back in. Suddenly, things are starting to take off because there are some really exciting results coming from the early adopters. A movement is born, but okay, watch out. When a movement is born, you better be ready for it within your organization. By December, they have 35,000 employees just dying to be part of it. So they say, okay, we'll let 2,200 represent the rest of you. And so they've got these 2,200 employees that are volunteering to be the bridge between this work. They get their partners involved. They've trained their 2,200 employees on what does it take to be a partner. They've got a checklist and criteria to do that. So this gets bigger. So you can just see how it just continues to explode and explode and explode. Then by June of 2019, they bring it to the shareholders meeting. Now this was big. This is they were on pins and needles. Will the shareholders like what we're doing? Almost unanimous. They approved the approach. And then by June, they started to give input to they have a board there that's responsible for operations. And so input into the operations board is coming from outside as well as in, and this 2,000 volunteers are providing a link to our customers, much closer link than we've ever had before. So things continue to explode. They continue on, and we map them, and this was up until COVID, right? So COVID hit, and we weren't sure what was going to happen. Will all of this, how is this going to play out through a pandemic when every business is impacted? And they were, like any business, incredibly impacted. But what we saw during COVID, and I think all of us probably saw this, was that purpose-centered businesses, because they are more adaptable, because they have better trust within their entire ecosystem, they actually fared so much better than businesses that were not purpose-driven, that were only focused on the bottom line. And this round kind of crazy thing, I mean, if you think about it, this is what they had built. So their business is at the center. The next layer out is their partners. Then they've got relationships. This is all the big cluster of people. That's all their consumers and people that they're stakeholders. And then on the outside, this is their shareholders. And when you're building relationships and trusting authentic communication with all of these people, it's not a wonder that a purpose-driven business outperforms any other business in their any other competitor. So purpose pays, but you've got to get it right. This is a really good, I guess I'm a mapping person, but I really love the way this sort of lays out. How does purpose lead to performance? Well, purpose leads to performance because you've done the work, you have shared identity, shared beliefs, values. That leads to alignment, and alignment builds trust. You've got lower employee turnover, people stay, you recruit the best talent. Intrinsic motivation. I would add a few things to this, but I love the slide, and that leads to performance. And so the Sustainable Development Goals, when we think again about purpose is the commitment to create value by contributing to the benefit of society, the Sustainable Development Goals are really key to that. And as I said, we won't reach them without your work. And we're halfway there. We've been set back by COVID, but I'm going to leave you with a video about this work. And if we could play the video, that would be great. Thank you so much. So it's been such an honor to be here. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm open to any questions that you have. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, for an inspiring talk and raising several issues which at the level of the corporation, the level of the organization. It reminded me that the business enterprise is one of the greatest human inventions. And without them, we wouldn't have been able to address all these problems of global development that you mentioned. And of course, this brings its own challenges. And this is what we're here to address. Any questions, or comments? Naso. If you're going to submit your questions through the system, please do so. Naso, carry on.
Hello, Christa. Thank you for the inspiring speech.
Thank you.
So, dreams come true. Actually, I was trying to find how we are going to speak about purpose, and we finally meet through LinkedIn, and now you're here live.
So glad you did.
Just a question. You brought all your experience here concerning purpose, and I'm sure that you've been in many places talking to different leaders. I want your feeling why this is real and not wishful thinking now.
Yeah, why now? I think it's such a good question. I think business has always been solving problems, right? That's what business is about. But we've seen this disconnect, right? Business is supposed to be helping society and the planet, and things have come apart a little bit. And I think the world is seeing this disparity between the haves and the have-nots. And they're also seeing on the news, climate change, all of these things. And so employees want to work for a business that actually makes a difference. And so some of that, as these things are happening, and we're starting to see, also business is the dominant institution of our day, right? More people are working in business than anything else. And so we have a real role, a responsibility, the privilege, actually, of making some real change. And I think that's why today.
Thank you. Any questions? I have a couple, Chris, myself, and then probably more will come. Now, I was talking to one of our friends here who is a consultant.
Yeah.
And she was telling me she mostly consults small businesses, although you talked about multinationals. But I think on a different scale, the problems are not very different. So she said to me, one of the problems I have is convincing the owners of the businesses to see the link between their business and purpose. Now, have you come across people who find it difficult to see the link at any kind of business? And if so, what do you do? How do you convince them?
Yeah, such a good question. Yes, of course. In any business, people are like, we've been doing this way for years. Why should we change? This is just a fad. I mean, I don't know if you guys remember when the internet was first kind of coming out. I'm old enough to remember that. People said, oh, that's just a fad. That's going to go away. But I think it's one of those things that's transforming business. But yes, we certainly see a lot of people that are resistant to trying to embrace it. And it's understandable. It's a very different way of leading. You are risking something when you say, I'm going to commit to making this type of change. But I would say there are a couple different ways to approach it, and it really depends on the business. Some businesses, they'll start with something small, right? They'll give it a test. Some, let's try one project and we'll put a few people on it. This Ajay Banga example that I gave you at MasterCard, I would say that probably started as a test at MasterCard. One of the things that totally surprised him was not only how quickly they got there and what a great profit it was, but how many people. He was just going to assign 2 people to be part of that. He had had 10,000 people apply. So time after time, these leaders that I talked to, they didn't buy into it at the beginning. A lot of them, they did it because they felt pressure from their employees. But what they see, just starting, how the whole organization lifts up. I mean, you saw that chart where 35,000 employees want to be part of this. Things happen where we've had one interview with an organization, and the CEO said there was this one division of their business that was underperforming, radically underperforming. And so he came in and sort of talked to them authentically in a way he'd never done before. Like, we're underperforming. I don't know if how we're going to fix this, and let's, but this is our purpose. This is what we're trying to do. I'm open to you're helping us. You own this as much as I do. And within a few months, his chief financial officer kept coming in and talking to him and doing reports. And they'd been in the red in certain areas. And he'd come in and say, oh, we're kind of in the green. We're in the green here. We've made it. And he, after a few weeks of doing that, he's like, I think you're not reading these numbers right. There is no possible way that we could be getting out of this rut that we're in so quickly. And he's like, no, let me show you. People are saving money. They feel part of it. Workers are staying longer. Everybody's pitching in, and the whole organization is transformed. I mean, it can happen very quickly, but I would caution you to think that it'll happen quickly. I really would say build the foundation, because one of the risks with that is that people get really excited and they want to be part of it. And if you haven't thought out how they will be part of it, they can be disappointed, right? And maybe this isn't really what we're doing. We're still just about profits, and this is just window dressing. So really take your time, build the foundation, and know that the organization will lift up if you've got everything in place. So it's like anything. It's like digitization, right? You can't get people on fully digitized until you've built the infrastructure. So
thank you.
Long-winded answer, sorry.
Any other question? Don't see anybody. Well, let me ask the final one myself. When we think about purpose, there's something that bothers me sometimes, that can a company be too purpose-driven to the point of being dogmatic? Because the purpose is something noble, it's an ideal. And as we know, ideals can be traps. Because we can be sort of trapped into accomplishing the ideal, and with the danger of being dogmatic. Is this just my own imagination, or have you seen this people being somehow too purpose-driven?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that our system now is we're still in the old system where, if you are a major company and you lay off employees, your stock price goes up, right? So we're struggling with this transition between the old system and how we see value and the new one that's emerging. And so there's a risk there, and I think that's what you're maybe getting at, of, could you, if you forget about profits and strictly go into we're solving the world's problems, I think that that's a huge mistake. And I don't think that's not a viable business strategy. Business needs to be profitable, and doing good in the world should be profitable, but there are steps to do that. And so I think it is probably, could be a risk, most likely for a smaller business, right? Once you're in a business where you've got so many stakeholders, I think hopefully you're guarded against that, but it'll take time.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here and for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.